Welcome to the Tea with the NC, where we dive into nuances of eligibility, best practices, and professional development. I'm Malcolm Pollock from the Eligibility and Compliance Department, and today we'll be exploring FHSAA and the legislative process. Joining me today are the other members of the Eligibility and Compliance team, Ashton Mosley, Stephanie Schaefer, and Jordan Stark.
Hello, hello.
Hey, hey.
Hey, y'all.
All right. So before we dive into, I guess the bulk of our conversation, which is, mainly our association, the legislative process and all of those details and things, I kind of wanted to talk about the history of our association. Where did we get established? How did we get to this point where we are today?
Yeah, the FHSAA was founded in April of 1920 by a group of 29 principals. They wanted to come together to have a uniform set of rules and promote fair competition. So that's how it was started, just a group of principals who recognized a need for some sort of structure in the world of athletics. And it was mainly schools in the northern and central part of Florida coming together to make that happen.
So with that, right, you said the intent was to promote and establish fair competition and a general set of rules for certain numbers of schools to follow, right? So where did those initial rules kind of come from and what were they focused on, I guess you could say?
Yeah, so I think they started out more the competition rules for the game itself. So let's make sure that we're all following the same rules. I think if you've grown up playing cards or board games, you find out that somebody else's family plays it a different way. And they were finding that whenever they... Uno, yes. Yeah. So they were finding that out when they came together to play. So let's have a uniform set of rules for the game itself. And then down the road, that developed into eligibility rules. And then it developed into standards for postseason. So it was developed over those 40 years into what we're familiar with today.
So when they first met, were they in Gainesville?
Yeah, they were actually at the University of Florida.
Okay. So do you know where this common misconception came from that we are in Tallahassee? Because it seems like we've always been located in Gainesville.
And everyone always assumes that we're in Tallahassee. Yeah, I think that is because people assume we're a state organization, right? So they think we're a state agency, and if you're a state agency, you have to be located in Tallahassee. They don't understand that the FHSAA is actually a nonprofit that is named in Florida statutes as a governing body for high school athletics.
That makes sense.
So going back to the initial, I guess the onset of the FHSAA and the individuals or the schools and principals that it initially included, we can all agree that there was initially some types of students that were left out, right? So if we fast forward to the 90s, there was the introduction of Florida Statute 1615, which is also known as the Craig-Dickinson Act. Can we kind of delve into, I guess, the ramifications and the impact that the introduction of the Craig-Dickinson Act had on our association and what doors it opened for non-traditional students?
Yeah, so until the 90s, we were functioning as member schools, and the students at those member schools had access to athletics. And in the 90s, it was seen that there was a need for non-traditional students, the biggest one at that time being home education. So the Craig-Dickinson Act introduced the ability for home education students to have access to extracurricular programs at their local high schools. So it wasn't just athletics, we're talking all extracurricular activities, but that was the introduction of what we refer to as non-traditional students.
And someone with a newer perspective to the association, it's interesting because you're saying Craig-Dickinson Act. I know that's accurate. But in my mind, I'm thinking more of this is the Tim Tebow Act.
Yeah.
Even though that was way later, this was established before, I'm like, when I think of homeschool education students participating at public schools, I think Tim Tebow Act. But it's cool that it's blossomed and ballooned into now we allow 7 different types of non-traditional students, where we just had home education, and now we're looking at PEP students, private school students, charter school students. Our definition of non-traditional student has really blossomed and ballooned.
It's been one of those things that's been added to and added to and added to, right? So you started out with home education students, you added charter school students, you added virtual school students, private school students, and now we include traditional public school and then public school transfers. So yeah, it's developed over time, starting with the home education student, and then as the education options grew, so did this statute relative to non-traditional participation.
And with that, speaking of the Craig Dickinson Act in general, it speaks to it being Florida statute and us essentially as the FHSAA establishing bylaws to allow for students to participate home education at that time. In 1997, something within the Florida legislature also happened. Can we speak to what happened in 1997 revolving around the legislative changes and the way that that impacted our association as well?
1615 is the one relative to the non-traditional student participation and some of those eligibility standards, like your GPA requirement. In addition to 1615, the FHSA is involved in 1620. And what you're referring to in 1997, that's when we were recognized statutorily as the governing body for high school athletics. So 1620 says that the FHSA governs high school athletics in the state of Florida for public schools. And in addition to that, we can have private schools in our membership. So when we talk about that, we're talking about any school grades 6 through 12, including students in those grade levels being part of our membership.
Got it. So, just piggybacking off what Jordan just said, and I'll bring it to Ashton. We were talking about 1615, the impacts that 1620 had on our association. Steph spoke to the non-traditional types that we've seen included over the past 25 or so years with the amendments to this statute. It also includes, Ashton, it addresses transfer students. Can we talk a little bit more about transfer students, what qualifies as a transfer student, and how that is also spoke about within 1615?
Yeah. Well, my first question is, what year was the transfer rules written in state law? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was 2017-18.
Okay. So previously, before 2017-18, state statute did not mention transfer regulations. It was in the FHSAA handbook. When it went into state statute, it allowed for students who participated at their school previously in a sport and then transferred to another school to meet one of the 4 criteria listed in state statute, being active duty military move, foster care placement, court-ordered custody change, and good cause as determined by the school board or the school district or the governing board of the private school or charter school. That's what it initially was. And then recently they added another layer to that to allow public school students who transfer after starting a sport to continue participating at the public school while they attend another school in that sport. Any other sport would be at the new school.
Yeah, so let's talk about a specific example. Fall sports started July 28th, and I'm a football player. So I go out, I'm participating with School A during the first 2 weeks of the football season, and week 3, I transfer to School B. What you're saying there is that while attending School B, I can continue to play football for School A. Are there any requirements for that?
Yes, you have to have transferred from a public school. So if you transferred from a private school, you wouldn't be eligible to continue at your previous school.
Okay, and it's only that sport for the remainder of that school year. You had said that any new sport I have to do with my new school.
Yeah, so if you're playing football and then you want to start basketball at your new school, you would have to start basketball at your new school. It couldn't be at School A.
And if I wanted to play football for School B, it goes back to those 4 exceptions you mentioned earlier. The military orders, the foster care, the court order changing custody, or the good cause.
Yep.
Okay.
And Jordan, I love you brought a specific example. So I have a question to add to that, talking about transfer students and windows. So if I try out for a football team, maybe it's 1, 2, 3 days of tryouts, but I failed to make the team. Because I'm not on the team, am I still considered a transfer student? Is that how that would work? I want to clarify that for listeners.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steph. So the statute itself actually says that a student cannot transfer and participate in a sport if they've already participated in that sport at another school during the same school year. So when we talk about participating in the sport, it's very specific to the season. Going back to football, July 28th was the official start date for football. Any activity I do on or after that official start date locks me into that school. And if I subsequently go to another school, then I've become a transfer student. So that's even if it was just tryouts, even if it's just a workout to show off my requisite skill and ability, anything that is school sponsored for that sport on or after the official start date locks me in.
Gotcha.
And in addition to that, Ashton mentioned good cause. Jordan mentioned it as well, talking about transfer students. I think one of the misconceptions is that our department oversees that process. I think Ashton mentioned that the districts and schools develop their own policy. And so from our standpoint, can we talk a little bit more about good cause and the way that it's applied? It's not something that our association approves. It's,
Right.
We support what the districts, essentially decide. But can we go a little bit deeper into good cause and what that looks like?
Right. So as Ashton mentioned, good cause is something that's developed by either the school district or the governing body when you're referring to charter or private schools. So it is their own set of transfer rules that they deem appropriate for a student to have to meet in order to continue that sport during the same school year. So when we talk about it being up to the district, that means that it's no longer up to the FHSAA. When it became part of statute, as Ashton mentioned, back in 2017-18, it took the authority away from the FHSAA. So just like you said, Malcolm, we're supporting what the district has in place by referring things back to the district when we get questions about transfer eligibility. And ultimately, the district's good cause policy decides that student's future for that sport. We're not able to come in and say yes or no on whether or not a student meets that policy. We're also not able to provide waivers of a district's good cause policy.
Got it. To kind of, I guess, go back, we were talking about when 1,615 has kind of dominated the conversation. We'll kind of segue into 1,620, which we briefly spoke on as far as state statute recognizing the FHSAA as the governing body of high school athletics, right? So with that, our policies, a lot of our bylaws, I should say, they have to mirror or at least match, state statute, right? State statute is the baseline, and then we build our bylaws based on the statutory laws that are in place. So with that, there's times where the law changes and therefore our bylaws will change. But on the flip side of that, there's times where there may be a bylaw that a parent or a student, may want to appeal or that they don't agree with. And we're sort of forced to just kind of fall on the sword and say, hey, this is state statute. So we're forced to, enforce that law. Can we speak a little bit more about, I guess, our policies and bylaws and how state statute kind of dictates or serves as the baseline to what we can actually establish and put in place?
Yeah, so I think you said it best when you said that the statute is going to be the baseline. Since we're named in Florida statutes as the governing body for athletics, we have to enforce the state statutes that are in place relative to athletics and extracurricular activities. So when it comes to 1,620, that's more outlining our governance structure and standards. That's your bylaw adoption, recruiting, investigative procedures, due process, that a student has to pass a physical evaluation, the concussion protocols, all that fun stuff is coming from statute. So when you see it in the FHSAA handbook, it's also going to have a reference to a statute following the rule. And that means that the FHSAA does not have authority to waive or change that, right? So when it comes to anything that's in statute, we have to enforce it. We cannot waive it, and it's not appealable through our process.
In that same point, I can remember this past spring, Commissioner Diaz amended our bylaws. Ashton, can you speak a little bit more about what that process was like? I mean, I know we're in the office and we get, essentially an email that says, hey, notify the schools that this is going to affect immediately. Ashton, can you talk about that process?
Yeah. So, first we'll start with our bylaws and policies. Majority of them do come from our membership, the FHSAA Board of Directors, our advisory committees. Staff members can submit bylaw proposals, policy proposals, and they can be voted on by the Board of Directors and then be put into place. All of our bylaws and policies must be ratified by the State Board of Education. And then we also, in 1,620, we also have the law that says the commissioner has the ability to ratify or change our bylaws at any time, which is what happened in January or February of 2025. And that bylaw was amended to allow member private school students to participate at any public school or any private school if their school that they attended did not offer the sport. They were the only ones at that time, the only non-traditional students who did not have the ability to participate at another school school if their school did not offer the sport by state statute. So they amended the bylaw, and then through the legislative session over the spring and then the summer, it was signed into law to actually bring the law in alignment with that bylaw and allow member private school students the opportunity to participate just as non-member private school students would.
So it's safe to say that FHSAA is no stranger to bills being proposed that will ultimately impact our bylaws and our policies, which kind of segues us into the most recent bill that we'll talk about a little bit briefly. Steph, can you give just kind of a quick overview of, I think it's Senate Bill 178 that is being proposed by Senator Jones, and what impacts and what does that bill look like, Steph?
If I had to SparkNote version Senate Bill 178, it's bylaws that allow coaches to use personal funds for the benefit of student athletes. This is used in good faith. It's really important that it's understood that this money or personal funds aren't used for recruiting purposes in any way, and they would be reported, is essentially the short, compact version of this Senate bill that is being proposed.
As I just think about my experience as a former coach, we as coaches serve, multiple responsibilities within, a student athlete. You're sometimes the father figure, sometimes the mentor, the counselor. And there's times, just quite frankly, where, you may have to give a student a ride home because of unforeseen circumstances. You may opt to, buy a student a meal if you're at an away game and they have no funds to do so. I guess, Jordan, just from your experience, I know you've been with the association for quite some time. The way our bylaws currently read, our policies, things like this, would this fall under impermissible benefit, or is this something that we would allow for presently, or is, what is your take on everything that we're kind of talking about?
I think Senate Bill 178 actually kind of clarifies how our staff is implementing the current policy when it comes to impermissible benefits in recruiting. It's like you said, when we're looking at impermissible benefits, we're looking at something that is reoccurring, something that's going to impact a student's ability to attend a particular school or impact enrollment decisions. So when you're talking about something like transportation, as you mentioned, sometimes there are unforeseen circumstances that put you in a situation where you really don't have a choice. So if you get a call that mom's running late and she's not going to be there for another hour, instead of sitting outside the facility with the student athlete until mom can get there, giving the kid a ride home is something that would be permissible under Senate Bill 178. And actually now the association would not look at that as something that impacted a student's enrollment decision or was a determining factor in whether or not the student could attend the school, right? That's an extenuating circumstance. It doesn't happen on a regular basis. So this is just clarifying that would not be considered an impermissible benefit. The only difference now, under 178, the coach would have to report that to the association anytime that happened.
Right. And so I think, I guess not to go too deeply in it because we're in sort of the beginning phases of it. Obviously this bill was proposed or filed, I should say, as of October 14th and has an effective date of July 1st, 2026. So with that, there's, sort of several steps that this bill has to go through before it's, finalized and put into place. What does that process look like? Ashton or Jordan or anyone who wants to speak to, maybe tracking this bill or seeing where it goes?
So in general, a bill that's filed this early, October 14th, prior to the session beginning, it's going to have time to go through committees. They have time to analyze it and even amend the language if they see it appropriate. This particular bill, once the session begins, will have an opportunity to do that, to go through the process, to be assigned to committees, to be analyzed and amended before it reaches its final version to be put on the floor for vote. And if it is approved through the legislative session, then it still goes before the governor. The governor has an opportunity to veto it or sign it. And with an effective date of July 1, we have up until that date to make those determinations. So then the association would start working on amending the bylaws that this impacts and creating any sort of process or procedure to assist schools in remaining compliant.
So just to reiterate that, this bill has just been proposed. It's not being voted on yet because session hasn't started yet. So we'll keep track of it and see what happens with it, because I love tracking bills.
I think the eye-opening, part of this discussion that we've had today is just, I'll say from my personal experience prior to joining the association, I had the thought that every bylaw or policy was developed by FHSAA, and technically that is true. But there's times where
You thought it was just staff members sitting in a room
Right.
like, this is what the rule needs to
And
be.
saying,
Right.
no, you
Right.
can't do that.
Right. And I think that's a common misconception that several on the outside,
Yeah.
because we are standing in front of the bylaw or the policy that we're enforcing, whether, we stand on this side or the other.
We're always seen as supporting it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, to be honest, I think we've kind of covered the bulk of what we wanted to talk about today. So, I think, Steph being the newest member of our team, I know a lot of this was informative to her, and this is her very first episode with us, on the extended version of our Tea with the NC podcast. So I think it'll be perfect for her to close us out.
Thanks, Malcolm. I appreciate that. And I'm so thankful to be here. This team is a wealth of knowledge and has so many years of expertise. And I think it's always important and cool to hear the origin story and history behind the association, how bylaws and policies work, how we aren't just a group in a room saying no because we want to. I think that's all important. We will keep you up to date as we get updates on what is happening with this Senate Bill 178. But for now, we are so grateful that you sipped some tea with ENC today. And thanks for wanting to stay in the know and stay eligible and stay compliant. Have a great season, everybody.
We'll be right back.